Hello, I'm Noel Shear. If our Parliament had a department for central casting, then tonight's guest would probably be called on more than any other. He has his own electorate, which he has continuously occupied for 28 years, representing 4 political parties, 3 of which were essentially the same. So used are we to seeing him there that it's beginning to look like his own fiefdom, and more to the point of politics, he exhibits a centrality of position that has made some people ask whether that is conciliatory or opportunistic. Tonight I'm pleased to be in conversation with the member for Ohariu and leader of the United Future Party, Peter Dunne. Welcome to Triangle.
Hi Noel, good to be here.
Did I say anything bad about you there?
No, you didn't. I listened very carefully.
Oh, see, you're currently the member for Ohariu. You've been there since '84, and you are helping the government because you're in a confidence and supply arrangement with them. And you're also Minister of Revenue, but outside Cabinet. Does that irk you, being outside Cabinet?
No, it doesn't actually. It means I've got Mondays to myself.
Yes.
Because it's a bit of a fiction, really. I mean, I go to Cabinet meetings when I've got items
Yeah.
that
All right.
are on the agenda there.
Yes.
I serve on about 4 different Cabinet committees, so I fully participate and see all the documents and papers. I just don't have to sit through a Cabinet meeting on Monday.
Oh, well, it's not a problem. You were a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party from '84 to '94. Why did you leave?
Oh, it was a series of things. I discovered actually way earlier than that, probably in the mid-80s, because I'm a very avid follower of British politics, that my natural home was what became the Liberal Democrats.
All right.
And I always hoped that the Labour Party in New Zealand might have evolved into a more Liberal Democrat party.
Right.
After 1990, Mike Moore, who I didn't have a great deal of regard for, as leader, wanted to take Labour back to its roots.
Yes.
So he was someone who was feeling a little bit out of sorts anyway, suddenly finding themselves in a party that was going to try and go back to the 1930s.
Right.
With MMP on the horizon, I saw the opportunity for a new party to form and began a journey which is essentially to try and, over, as you've alluded to, various incarnations, to try and establish New Zealand's Liberal Democratic Party.
Yeah, so you're looking for a centrist
A
position.
centrist position, a position that essentially says, look, we respect the value and the relevance of free markets, free trade, an open approach to economic policy, but at the same time on the social policy front, education, health, welfare, etc., while we are all about people having choices and freedoms, we also acknowledge the state has a fundamental responsibility to help those who are less well off. So it's that balance, really.
I mentioned before that you're in confidence and supply with the government, because you were also in confidence and supply with the Labour 2005-2008 one, which shows again a centrality. Or is it, as some people say, opportunistic?
Well, the critics will always accuse me of being an opportunist. I've got a very simple approach, and it's always been to say that whether it be Labour or National or any other party for that matter, let's focus on what we've got in common.
Yes.
If we've got various issues in common that we can progress, then we should do so. And if that means being in a confidence and supply agreement to progress them, so be it. If we've got issues we differ on, let's respect our differences and continue to pursue them. But too often in politics you see parties that try and focus on how they can patch up the differences, forgetting there's a whole lot of common ground that they've got that they can make progress on.
Well, even not so much passion, but emphasise the differences,
and
exaggerate the differences.
Look, I'm not a member of the National Party, I'm not a member of the Labour Party. I belong to United Future because I believe in what it stands for. But that doesn't mean that where we've got common ground with National or Labour, or the Greens even, we don't work together to progress those things. That to me is just common sense.
That's fairly unusual.
Well,
because I'm not criticising. I'm saying this sounds eminently reasonable.
Well, that's the funny thing. I don't think it's dramatic.
Yeah.
I think it is eminently reasonable. I think it is common sense. But I'm amazed at the number of critics I get. The opportunistic one comes up all the time. You'll do a deal with anybody. Well,
Dance with anybody.
Yes, because if that means that policy objectives can be pursued, absolutely. Or you've got no principles or values. Well, no, it doesn't mean that at all, because, again, as I say, there are various things you disagree on. Or but politics is supposed to be it's supposed to be the contest of ideas. You're one of these people that tries to make the system work. Well, yes, it is. People actually living in the suburbs, they like the contest of ideas, but they also want to know what it means for them in terms of their job, their income, their health, their education.
Well, so we're looking at how your party evolved to its present form. You founded Future New Zealand in 1994, and it had a number of ex-Labour and ex-National Party members in it.
Yes, what happened was we started with Future New Zealand, that then became United New Zealand, and in 95, 96 was a coalition partner for the then national government. We had 4 Labor, 4 ex-Labor and I beg your pardon, 3 ex-Labor and 4 ex-National MPs. Then what happened in the late 90s was the United Party, as it then was, which was very much in that liberal vein that I described earlier, with a very strong belief about families, families not for any sort of sentimental or ethical reason, but simply because families are the basic foundational unit of society, and if we get families working well, we get countries working well.
But your party was then attracted a number of
this is the point I was coming
overtly Christian people.
There was another party around at that stage that had a similar focus on family. And it seemed to us, again, consistent with the principle I stated before, we've got common ground, work together. It was a bit silly, the two of us competing with each other. So we merged. What I discovered after the merger was, in effect, that they saw family in a very prescriptive, narrow sense, and they saw their role as being to protect the rights of traditional conservative families, whereas I saw family in a much more generic model. So that common point started to become stretched. We were then in a confidence and supply agreement with the Labor Party, and as I've said on many occasions, I felt like that very awkward acrobat in the circus riding 2 horses that were moving further and further apart. I was conscious of the fact that both the alliance before us and New Zealand First had failed to survive coalition arrangements, and was determined that we would, and we did to our cost, but it meant that the compromises became too great, and in the end, frankly, I had to effect a situation that led to them walking out.
Well,
which of course cost us both in the long term.
Yeah, but they also got voted out, or failed to get voted back in.
Well, yes, and then after the election, of course, they tried then to take over the organisation of the party and to get at me, and this was the time to have the, if I can use their terms, the schism, which led to them drifting off, and some of them are now in the Conservative Party and various other right-wing
So you'll be a
groups.
little careful with who you dance.
Oh, it's a salutary lesson, but and to some extent you might say, and my critics would, well, serves you right. You know, you chose to focus on people who would give you something in terms of issues. Yeah, maybe, but I thought that actually dealing with people who profess to be Christian, I'd be dealing with people who were honest and had integrity. And sadly, in that instance, I was betrayed.
That wasn't all the same thing. So you yourself are socially conservative.
I reject that.
No,
I'm not.
Well, tell me. Well, let me throw
you develop your point, but I'm sorry I bristled.
Well, in respect to, say, medical cannabis.
Well, see, I thought you were going to go there. I thought you were going to raise 1 or 2 other issues, like my attitude to drugs. I am not socially conservative at all, but I take a very strong view that it's a bit silly favouring causes that are trendy if they are damaging. So while I have a relatively liberal view towards alcohol, because I think the alcohol debate gets completely overstated, I don't see the point in legalising drugs like cannabis and the whole range of others, of the synthetic cannabinoids, etc., when we know the risks. On the medicinal cannabis issue, I think that's one of the biggest scams around, because there is a product available that gives called Sativex, which is available on prescription. It has the same properties of the medicinal cannabis that people see.
But it's not a cannabinoid.
No, but the interesting thing is when you talk to the people who want medicinal cannabis, they just want to be able to grow their own. And all the pharmacological evidence...
that's the backstory, isn't it?
The pharmacological evidence says that the benefits of medicinal cannabis come through ingestion, not inhaling. So I think that the story about I need my cannabis to ease my pain is frankly a lie.
Well, that's often sung in a very high key or whatever. It's often stated very strongly.
Yes, it is.
And as a ploy for a passion.
I think it's a smokescreen, if you excuse the pun, for actually the cannabis debate. If there wasn't a medicinal product available, that might be a different story.
So, I mean, to cut right to the other end of it, you would not be in favour of even investigating ordinary cannabis available as a parallel to alcohol?
No, I'm not really. I think that while I have a reasonably relaxed attitude about alcohol, I think it's a classic case of if we knew then what we know now, we might have taken different stances 100, 200 years ago in terms of its promotion.
Because cannabis has been grown to much higher strength than
and that's the other point too. It's much stronger now than even 30 or 40 years ago. But I don't see therefore why we should repeat the era. You know, I get people who contact me saying, oh, you're hypocritical because you are reasonably tolerant about alcohol. Why don't you apply the same tolerance to cannabis? And it's a bit like learn from your mistakes is my answer.
Okay. So that story has moved on. Family, you're still, I was going to say in the family way, you're still very strongly an advocate for the family as the core of society.
I'm an advocate for the family because that's the group from which we all spring. Now, it doesn't mean that I've defined the family on the sort of dance on a pinhead, traditional family, ne'er the twain shall meet with the... Because families come in many shapes and sizes. And
because there would be perhaps...
It's the concept rather than the specific. That's
so you're fairly relaxed about families made up of, say, 2 women and children?
Well, I think
like a lesbian couple.
Social conditions are changing rapidly.
Yeah.
And I think that there are 2 important points to remember. One is parents don't choose their children.
Yeah.
I beg pardon, children don't choose their parents, I should say.
Yeah.
And the other is that it's a case of what is the best environment for those children to be brought up in. Now, if it's a lesbian or a gay couple and they are capable of providing good care and attention for those children, so be it.
Yeah.
You could equally argue there are many heterosexual couples who can't provide that.
They're doing a very bad job.
So I think it's a matter of horses for courses.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this sort of very narrow prescriptive world that some argue for really has a great deal of merit these days.
A sudden switch to a new bullet point, Republicanist. You're again the monarchy.
Yes, I am.
So let's get shot of it.
Yeah. Look, when you've got as thick an Irish heritage as I have,
right.
I'm a 3rd generation New Zealander of completely Irish extraction.
Yes.
From the south.
Yes.
So there's no way I could be anything other than a very staunch Republican. And I think that, as a historian, I've got a great passion for the British monarchy, but it's Britain's monarchy.
Yeah.
It's not ours.
Yes.
And I follow the developments within the monarchy with interest, but I think we should be able to develop our own indigenous style here, and actually the model I would use would be the elected Irish president.
Right. Okay.
So very similar powers, in fact identical powers to our Governor General, but elected by the people.
But look at all that lovely medieval pageantry you throw away.
Well, no, you'd keep a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
But it would be in the same way that the Indians, the South Africans, Pakistan, there are various countries within the Commonwealth who have their own president, but are still part of that Commonwealth family of nations. And I see New Zealand having the capacity to be no different.
But maybe you're not going to get your wish because the recent royal wedding and the probably fairly soon royal baby tends to keep it.
They do, but I think it's inevitable. It's one of the differences I have with John Key, and it sums up our style perhaps.
Yes.
John Key and I would both say it's inevitable that one day New Zealand will be a republic.
Yes.
John Key and I would both say that not a great deal will change as a consequence.
Right.
I say, so why not?
Yes.
He says, so why?
So why bother? Why
and that's I suppose, the point at issue.
Yeah.
I think for me, and for New Zealand as an increasingly diverse nation, I think it's an important statement about our future. Doesn't mean we eschew our relationships or our history with Britain. Doesn't at all. But it just simply means we make a stand about who we are.
Yeah, there was a move, a suggested move a few years ago, to get people like Ed Hillary and so on, respected elder statesman type people, and put them at the top.
Yes, you could do that. I mean, the issue then comes down to how you choose your head of state. And that idea arose from the notion that perhaps the Parliament would elect the head of state.
Yes.
People start to be a bit wary about just who Parliament might elect after a while. You might get the head
jobs for your mates. Sort of
exactly, first time round, but the next time round it's jobs for your mates.
Yeah.
I personally would prefer an elected head of state. The Irish are a very interesting model because they have an elected head of state. It's usually been contested by the major parties, but the candidates that they've put up, be they Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or whoever, have tended to be fairly unifying candidates.
Okay.
So even though they're standing on a party label, they're not sort of last week's political combatants.
Yeah.
And whoever has emerged as president, and there have been some remarkable Irish presidents over the years, has had that capacity to stand sort of for the nation.
I had
and above politics.
Sort of memory there of Keith Holyoake way back. He resigned as Prime Minister. 6 months later he was Governor General.
Yes, and the interesting thing about his Governor Generalship was that, and he said this in his farewell speech in 1983 at the state dinner, when Bill Rowling, who was the leader of the opposition and who'd been the Holyoake and Rowling families had been friendly for years, Rowling paid a very big tribute to Holyoake.
Yes.
And Holyoake said that meant more to him than anything else, because he had been conscious of his background.
Yes.
He'd been conscious of all the controversy around the politics, and it's
he'd left his partisanship aside, and he'd become a commendable Governor General. Yeah. MMP, is it fair?
I think it is. I mean,
it's done you very well.
It has, but I'm actually an advocate for STV.
Yes.
And I'll explain why in a moment. But I think MMP is fair compared to first past the post, because it presents an election result that reflects the will of the majority. You mightn't like its particular permutations, but it's more reflective of the will of the majority than first past the post. But I think its deficiency, which has become apparent to me in recent years, has been not so much the concept of list MPs, but the way in which list MPs have been A, selected, and B, behaved.
Yes.
The original notion was you would get your people of quality on the party list, people who you mightn't want to risk in an electorate because they might not be electable in that sense, but they had real attributes.
Yes.
What in fact you've ended up with are the party hacks, the people who can't win an electoral seat, or who don't want to, or the people who need to be favoured by the hierarchy. So in turn, their loyalty has become to that hierarchy, not to the country. I think we're missing out. So I'd go for STV, because under that system, even though it's a little more complicated, everyone is elected. The public in one way or another. The call.
I was thinking, coming from the other end, you see, you're an electorate MP, and you're in Parliament for that basis. Your own party got less than 1% of the vote last time round, and that raises eyebrows among people saying, what's this guy doing sitting not in cabinet but right next to cabinet, and being the guy who gave us the assets. So we'll come back to the moment.
But see, I think that we'll come back to that point.
We've got to come back to it because it's as badly overstated.
But I think that issue, I mean, you elect a parliament of 120 or 121 people. Whether someone ends up being a critical vote or not is really a consequence. It's not a deliberate move that people set out to make.
I think the thing that is worth focusing on is that you, with 0.6% of the vote, have a position of some privilege or some power or some leverage, and we're wondering, and we know the reason for that, because you got your election, you got it with a handsome 1,500 vote majority in your electorate. So you're loved in Ohio, but your influence spreads everywhere.
Well, look, that's the nature of coalition government. You put together a government. The magic figure is to get to 61, because that gives you your majority. And a Prime Minister, and this time it was John Key, it's been Helen Clark previously, have worked around till they've got that number of votes. I'm acutely conscious, and always have been, of what you might describe as tails wagging dogs. And the number of times people have said to me, not just in this term of Parliament, but over the years, you could bring the government down on this, and you should, are countless. And it's pointless, because the moment you do, I think the criticism that you make stands. What right have you got to do that?
But there's nothing legal to stop you doing that. It's just a sense of decency. Sense of decency.
And a fairly strong sense of morality about integrity and honouring commitments made. And I believe very passionately that when Parliament is elected, it's elected for a 3-year term, and it's the role of parliamentarians, whatever cards are dealt, to make the system work until the public next have their say.
I've been reading your justification for the way you voted, and as you say, we can take this as on the record, that you have for years advocated the current system. So it's not a new opportunistic deal on your part.
No, in 2005 was the first time we put forward the idea of saying, rather than sell assets on a wholesale basis and get rid of the lot, we would put, and we didn't name them at that stage, but we thought there was value in doing what Tony Blair was doing in Britain and what the Labour government in New South Wales was doing, and in Queensland, of saying, let's sell a selected portion of shares in a number of these assets, so that you get the benefit of the private investment, you get the opportunity to relieve debt, but you retain the state's control. We promised that in 2005, in 2008, in 2011. So. And after the election, in our confidence and supply agreement, I specifically got agreement from the government that we would not touch Kiwi Bank, we'd not touch Radio New Zealand, we wouldn't touch the entities that own water, and that we would put into law, not just sort of gentleman's agreement, but into law the 51%, the 49% caps. And as the debate unfolded, I got a further agreement from the government, which was incorporated into the bill, that the definition of shareholding wasn't just voting shares, it was all shares in financial instruments. So you couldn't get a situation where 51% of the voting shares were controlled by the Crown, but effectively 70% of the shares were controlled because they were non-voting or other instruments. So it's been very tight, very specific. And having A, campaigned on it for 3 elections, B, got those agreements, I'm just with this old-fashioned sort of guy that says you keep your word.
You keep your, well, you just, it's business as usual. Whether we agree with you or not, it's business as usual. It's consistent.
People knew where we stood.
At
every meeting, in every television debate. I'm pretty certain when I came here and was interviewed in the studio by Bomber Bradbury, actually, I made the point. So it wasn't as though this was suddenly something that came from left field that people were left gasping about. I think what happened though, and this is maybe the other side of your MMP coin, I think a lot of people before the election wrote us off. We weren't going to be there, we weren't relevant, therefore not worth looking at what our policy was. Therefore suddenly after the election, when they found that I was in that critical position, where's all this come from? How dare he? But again, that's not my fault. We were upfront and honest. And have simply carried through on commitments
given. You mentioned water further back as something which is sacrosanct against privatising. But very recently Maori have come up with objections under various treaty headings that say, and I wonder, it's almost like the Raglan golf course thing, that somehow or other the government got access to water under a government thing, and now they're selling it to private enterprise.
No, I reject that claim. In fact, some years ago I wrote a column when this issue first raised its head under the Labor government, and I called the column "Who Owns the Rain?" Because that's effectively what Maori are saying. If they own the water, then they're effectively saying they own the rain that fills the lakes.
But the same thing, they own the riverbed.
Well, you get into a big technical argument here. I've had it explained to me that there is a difference, which I'm not sure I accept, but there is a difference between the riverbed and the water flowing over the riverbed. So Maori could own the riverbed, but the water's owned, the water's owned by all of us. And it's as silly as an argument as the one that Clayton Cosgrove was raising, that was saying that it was because we're going to privatise a portion of Mighty River Power and it uses water in its dams, we were therefore privatising that water, and therefore that was contrary to my agreement. I mean, that is not just a long
more definitions yet to be.
That's bizarre.
I don't want us to run out of time before we've exhausted some of these. The public television in New Zealand, is this the end of the road?
I hope not. I really hope that the demise of TVNZ7 isn't the end of decent public broadcasting. It certainly means that, with the exception of channels like this one and I think Maori TV to some extent, we do not have a quality public broadcaster anymore. TVNZ gave up that responsibility years ago when it decided it's got a commercial mandate, I accept that, but it decided it had to become more crass and more loud and basically more just lowest common denominator than the worst of the American and the Australian stations.
Incidentally, I should acknowledge at this point that this program receives support from New Zealand.
And that's entirely appropriate. I think that's fine. But I think what the TVNZ7 debate has unleashed has been a sense of not so much just saving TVNZ7, or that was an important but unfortunately unsuccessful objective, but a much bigger argument about what it is we're actually listening to and viewing these days. And I am very critical of, and have been very vocally critical of, Television New Zealand. I think its news and current affairs presentations are on the whole appalling. I'm not interested in the opinions of their newsreaders. I'm not interested in what Mr. Sainsbury or any of his ilk think. I'm interested in the news and the stories, not the biases of the presenters. And I think, unfortunately, by this sort of personality approach, we are warping our news and we are warping the way in which people are getting their information.
Should we be worried then with the demise of TV7? Should we be worried about national radio and concert programs?
Well, I hope not. We have a specific provision in our agreement that A, they won't be privatised, and B, existing funding levels as set in this year's budget will be maintained. Now, that's as a minimum. I'm conscious that they are under financial pressure. But that's a baseline. I'd like to see some improvement from that. And I think that increasingly they will be jewels in our public broadcasting crown. And
well, they certainly are at the moment. If you want news, that's where you go.
That's right. And look, you hear a lot of criticism from younger people who say we don't listen to the radio, we don't watch television, we get it all off the net. This is all old-fashioned stuff. You hear a lot of people who say, well, TV or Radio New Zealand, well, that's really Wellington radio, ho-hum. I'm here in Auckland, I'll get my news from whoever. That's all true up to a point, but the moment you give up a national broadcasting stake, you give up, I think, a very strong... I'm reminded of when Sir James Shelley became the first director of broadcasting in the 1930s. He talked about broadcasting as part of our national identity. And I think if you were to give up any concept of public broadcasting, you're giving up part of our national identity.
Well, something that's becoming part of our national identity, you must be very pleased about, is Transmission Gully. Now, we're both Wellingtonians, and so we can bring out the molly on this one, because for years we've been wanting to get a bypass highway that goes from somewhere near Porirua to somewhere near Paikakariki to bypass all that winding around the thing. And you've been banging that drum for years, and congratulations.
Well, thank
you didn't do it, but I mean...
I haven't done it, but
it's...
But I think it's an interesting illustration of the point we were making before. I started banging this drum in the early 90s under a national government at the time that had no interest in Transmission Gully. In fact, thought I was slightly off my trolley for even suggesting that this white elephant should proceed. And I remember Jim Bolger having an argument with him in Cabinet one day, and he actually said, this thing, will never get off the ground. It's got no vantage point. Then the Labour government, which was the Labour Party, all very staunchly in favour of what I was doing in opposition, became the government. And we went through exactly the same process. And finally, after 2005, by that stage Labour had put up some money, about 600 million, and said, well look, it's over to the Wellington region to figure out, that's about half the cost, figure out the best option. We think the coastal highway's better, but you put up, here's some money and they can find the rest. And I got them to agree to saying they would be bound by whatever public opinion in the Wellington region was. And there was, you may recall, a big survey done that showed something like 96 or 97% in favour of Transmission Gully. It was overwhelming. So they then said, yep, fine, we'll go with Transmission Gully, provided Wellington comes up with the other half of the funding package. Wellington City Council, which had all been in favour of Transmission Gully, suddenly became opposed to it, and various others. So it stalled. National government came in, and Stephen Joyce said he was going to review all of this, and I said, you don't need to review it, we've done the whole work, and he said, no, I'm going to review it. So, and it became fairly clear early on that he was genuinely agnostic. The review started to point pretty strongly in favour of Transmission Gully, but one of the things about Stephen is that he's persuadable. Once he realised that was the position, locked into it, and now we set in place the process which has led to the approvals.
So this shows really, was an illustration of one of your acknowledged strengths of wheeling and dealing at the local level.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, that I've worked with 1, 2, 3 different governments now to get to this point, and we've actually got to the point where it's been a long time, I agree, but by being persistent and not giving up, and I think that's probably the role that I've played, whereas various others at various times might have been prepared to say, look, stop flogging the dead horse. I'm too stubborn for that. But actually, we've now got it to the point where it is going to go ahead. And that's
on this note of jubilation, we're going to call it to an end now. Grateful thanks to MP Peter Dunne for tonight's conversation. Thank you too for spending some of your time here with us on Triangle Television. Before you go, think about this. Whether or not you agree with Peter, you have to acknowledge that he has banged the drum for the Transmission Gully so loudly for so long. He and many others have recently got our wish. Until our next conversation, I'm Noel Cheer. Good night.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.